to stand shoulder to shoulder with German soldiers in defending Europe against the Bolshevik world enemy.
If the Germans had won, they would have given us some part of Ukraine.
I will absolutely follow the orders of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the German Armed Forces, Adolf Hitler.
Himmler, get up, down, up.
There was this one time when Himmler came to visit the division, right?
Yes, I saw it.
Were you aware of what the Germans were doing to the Jews at that time? Auschwitz?
We're making our way to the front lines while they are desperately trying to escape from it.
Petro, see, that fascist still alive.
What are you looking at? Leave now.
Why aren't the other divisions mentioned? Like a thorn in the side, it's exclusively our Ukrainian 14th Division Galicia.
All content in this video is for educational use only. We denounce totalitarian regimes and war criminals.
Ukraine, above all else Ukraine, above all, Galicia, the division of heroes, Galicia, the division of heroes.
Here in Lviv, we celebrate the anniversary of the formation of the SS Galicia Division every year at the end of April. In 1943, when the Third Reich realized it was unable to stop the Red Army, a decision was made to enlist the peoples of Eastern Europe in the fight against Bolshevism. After a massive recruitment campaign, about 80,000 Ukrainians, a huge number, applied to join the division. By the way, not everyone was accepted, and about 30,000 people actually joined the ranks. What drove these individuals to act? Is it really true that they pledged allegiance to the Third Reich and personally to Führer Adolf Hitler? What were the demands that the Ukrainians presented to the Germans? All of this and much more is coming up. All you need to do is subscribe, like the post, and the rest will surely be fascinating. We have a meeting scheduled with Zenon Wrublewski. At the age of 16, he made the decision to volunteer and join the SS Galicia Division. Today, he is celebrating his 100th birthday. He is one of the last two surviving members of the division in Ukraine. After being held captive in Vorkuta, he started to lose his sight. Why did you and so many other Ukrainians choose to join the Galician Division when the Ukrainian insurgent army was already active during that period?
I was aware of the UPA, though not completely. Of course, but I had a decent understanding. For some reason, I believed they were fairly weak as a state. I held this notion that if the Germans were victorious, they would certainly grant us a portion of Ukraine. Back then, I was just a soldier, only 16 years old. So, among my group of friends, we often used to think, had the war not ended, regardless of whether Ukraine, Russia, or the West prevailed, we would likely have received part of Ukraine. In conflicts like these, territories are often redistributed through peace agreements and negotiations. Whatever the victor, concessions are usually made to satisfy stakeholders and restore stability. Therefore, if the war had continued, part of Ukraine might have been allocated to us as part of a lasting settlement. And ultimately, it turned out that we were left with absolutely nothing at all. In fact, we've ended up making even more enemies than we had before.
Tell me, most of those people who joined the division did so voluntarily. But for the majority of people, was it voluntary mobilization or was it forced mobilization?
No. I met very few who were forced to go. There were some, but not many.
But a lot of people volunteered for mobilization on their own. They say there were 80,000 applications, so even the Germans didn't expect that many Ukrainians to sign up.
Absolutely. I heard 2 Germans talking about it. If only we had something like that here. Well, judging by the way the Ukrainians volunteered, it's clear that not everything was entirely right with that group either. Thank goodness.
Could you tell me how the Germans treated the Ukrainians specifically within the division? You were trained for a considerable amount of time, even going abroad for it. So, it wasn't simply a case of them gathering you up and tossing you onto the front lines, was it? You mentioned training there for half a year, possibly even more than a year.
Yes, indeed. We had training camps just like that. During those camps, they trained us, calling us the true Germans. They didn't exactly bully us, but they certainly pushed us hard and tested our limits. Once the training period ended, they were dismissed. It was at that point we officially became a military unit.
What did they do, you said? Rough stuff? Or just for no reason at all?
Well, you fall down, then you get up and fall down again. You don't see him, he was right there walking beside you, so don't even try to touch him. It's tough, you know. I can't say everyone. However, many of them, especially those in training, had really unpleasant personalities. The training included typical military activities: running, jumping, shooting, and hiding. That summed up the military training, and that was the extent of it.
Regarding the oath taken by the division's initial group, they pledged their loyalty to the Third Reich, and personally to Adolf Hitler. Is that correct? Ihor Ivankov, who is the division's chronicler and has authored 4 books on the subject, was even accepted into the division's Brotherhood. This Brotherhood exclusively includes former fighters or those who have a connection to the unit.
In general, they were required to take 3 oaths. Not many people are aware of this fact. Let me share something with you. We need to take a moment to digress here. When discussing the division members, it's important to know there were 42 SS divisions in the Reich. Out of these, 20 were actually the Waffen-SS. The division members were not part of the Allgemein SS, which is known as the General SS. So what exactly is the SS? It's an abbreviation for 2 German words, Schutzstaffel, which translates to security squads. Even if our Galicians had the desire to join, they would never have been accepted there. They were not SS men. Why? Because only Germans of Aryan descent who met the necessary physical standards, such as the required height and Aryan appearance, among other criteria, were accepted into the real SS. Furthermore, they needed to provide proof of their Aryan ancestry going back to the 5th generation or something similar. I can't recall the exact details. They were members of the party and the organization. Each individual had his own party card, his own unique number, and so forth. German legislation at that time did not permit individuals of other nationalities to serve in the Wehrmacht. So they resorted to a clever ruse, the SS, specifically the Waffen-SS. These volunteers were essentially incorporated into the Waffen-SS. In other words, our Galicians were not truly SS members. They took 3 oaths in total. The first was in the year 1943 at the Heidelager training camp located in Poland near the city of Debicka. The second oath was taken a year later after the division had been moved to Slovakia, and the third oath was taken in April of 1945. In fact, the division was already stationed near Feldbach in Austria. Since they belonged to the Waffen-SS and there were 20 such divisions, there were 2 Hungarian divisions, 2 Latin divisions, 1 Estonian division, and ultimately 1 Russian division, the 29th Rhone division. There was a French division, the Charlie Man, the 33rd, the 13th Hajar Croatian, as well as Flemish and Dutch divisions. There were 20 such divisions. They all had the same text for that oath. Absolutely every single one of them, word for word, without exception. I solemnly swear before God by this sacred oath that in our battle against Bolshevism, I will unconditionally follow the orders of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the German Armed Forces, Adolf Hitler. As a brave soldier, I am prepared at any given moment to sacrifice my life for this oath. It's noteworthy that there is no mention here of either Germany or the Reich. Hitler is referred to not as the head of the Reich, nor as the Führer, but solely as the commander-in-chief. Since the division soldiers were part of the German armed forces, I don't find this surprising. However, a year later, when they were already in Slovakia, they took a new oath, in which Hitler is again mentioned as commander-in-chief. Germany and the Reich are not mentioned anywhere, but Ukraine now appears. I'll read it. I solemnly swear before God that in the struggle against Bolshevism, for the liberation of my Ukrainian people and my Ukrainian homeland, I will render unconditional service to the Supreme Commander of the German Armed Forces and to all the fighters of the young European nations against Bolshevism, Adolf Hitler. As a brave warrior, I will not hesitate to give my life for this oath. Everything is clear. Let me read the original SS oath to compare. Adolf Hitler swears to you as Führer and Chancellor, in loyalty and valor. I swear to obey you and those above me until death. May God help me. The difference is stark, nothing more to add. By the time the division was stationed there in March of 1945, the Ukrainian National Committee had been formed and was led by General Pavlo Shandruk. The oath they took was as follows: I swear to Almighty God, standing before His Holy Gospel and the life-giving Christ, that I will spare neither my life nor my health, and will fight with arms in hand, everywhere and at all times, under the Ukrainian national flag, for the sake of my people and my homeland, Ukraine. Aware of this immense responsibility, I solemnly swear, as a soldier of the Ukrainian National Army, to execute all orders from my superiors with complete obedience and without conditions, while keeping official assignments confidential. We didn't delve deeply into that text. We were aware it wasn't ours because 99% of the division soldiers did not uphold Nazi ideology. Did they not support it? Absolutely not.
Were you aware of what the Germans were doing to the Jews at that time? I'm referring to Auschwitz and the extermination of the Jewish population.
I had heard about it. It was something impossible to hide. Everyone was discussing those ghettos, how people were being herded there and killed. Well, I was extremely very far removed from all of that.
For context, until the 1940s, in Galicia, the ethnonym ZH was the official, neutral, and literary term used to refer to Jews.
Mom was completing her college education, and along with her, Pravdiva Nimka was also finishing college. Christina Daum, that was her name. And Daum, just 3 simple letters on her hand. My mom assisted her with Polish, since it was a college where the language of instruction was Polish. In return, she helped my mom with German. This mutual assistance is how they became friends. It was one lovely evening. We were already preparing to go to bed in the kitchen. Then the doorbell rang. I happened to be standing by the door, so I went ahead and opened it. Christina walked in, and she was accompanied by her husband. It was Tadlevska. And that Tadlevski, he was Vykrest's son. His dad was Jewish, and, well, he converted and became Polish. So there she goes, leading the way, Krzyszka Tadlewska, with her 2 daughters following behind her. They walk into the kitchen, don't say a word, nothing. If you won't help me, I say, to hide the children, then I'll run, out the window. And then she says, in all seriousness, that they weren't home, but a policeman and 2 civilians had come to their house. Well, civilians. They came for the 2 girls. You see, they weren't subject to the rules since they were 3rd generation, and 3rd generation people weren't recognized. They won't do anything to me because I'm German. She's completely German. I have nowhere to send them. If they take them, they'll torture them because they're also... In short, we agreed my parents would keep those children with us. She went home, and the next day the police came and took her to Lonsky Street. They arrested her, even though she was German. Well, they began dragging the evidence back and forth. They made her work for a doctor, doing bandaging like a nurse. A woman came out, and through that woman she managed to slip her a piece of the note, a small piece of bread. That woman put it somewhere in her mouth. went out and continued on her way. This was a risky move, but it was necessary for her survival. The woman who helped her was brave, knowing the dangers involved in assisting. Despite the risks, she did not hesitate to help, showing the strength of human connection even in dire circumstances. And brought it to my mom. And there, in that note, it said that I would be there at such and such a time on such and such a day, and would be able to throw the note out the window. At that very moment, I went out to that window, walked down the street, and watched intently. She would go up to the window at Semel where she worked, and toss that ball out the window, you know. So I'd pick up the ball and then head back home. And what happened after that? Just a few threads. Oh my, listen here. You little rascal, she's hiding you. It's just like a mother talking to a child. For the third time, I bent down to pick up that ball, stood back up, but realized I already had it in my hand. I hear a whistle, so I don't look back. I just bring the bottle to my lips, and then I turn around. They searched me and asked, "God, what did you pick up?" I replied. "It just fell out, can't you see?" Well, they kept me there overnight. Early the next morning, they searched me once more and then let me go. Needless to say, I never returned there. She wrote letters to Hitler, to Himmler, and to all the top officials. And you know why the governor called her in?
Governor Vector, correct? Correct.
He read it. He pulls a seal out of his pocket. He slapped his glove down, as you know, and signed it. Then he told the woman, "Go find the kids." She was screaming that she didn't know where they were. "Go find the kids, take them inside, no one's going to harm them." But she said, "Mom, if you look away for just a second and others come in, they'll grab them." He asked, "What are you looking at? Don't you trust me?" Eventually they got along. Mom took the kids inside so things could settle down. They ended up hiding at our place for about 2 months. Well, if the police came, they'd hide behind the closet. They could hide from a neighbor, but not the police.
Tell me, what was the ethnic makeup of Lviv at that time? I know there were a lot of Poles living there back then, as well as Jews and Ukrainians.
It was roughly half and half. Ukrainians and Poles each made up about half, with some Jews too.
Were the Jews terrified when the Germans arrived? What occurred to them? Were they gathered and pursued?
How did that happen? There wasn't anyone rounding them up. It was simply that in crowded areas like those, there would be a notice saying, "Jews born between certain years must report to a specific location on a designated day at a particular time." And that was it. They would already be standing there from midnight onward. No one.
Didn't get them out, and did they take them later? They took them to the ghetto.
Pozamartinivsky. The ghetto was situated on the left side there. I personally witnessed Poles at the corner of Kopernika and Slovatsky, yes, in Kovopaski. They gathered around 10 or 15 people. I'm not certain of the exact number. A tram was stationary there due to a lack of electricity. Those Polish snobs compelled them to push the tram uphill along Kopernika Street. Imagine trying to get 10 men to push a tram like that, while the women were desperately trying to stay inside their homes. Well, those scoundrels were quite thrifty, since he was earning money there. And she was also making a decent amount. So they'd sell any clothes they had, or perhaps some shoes. We chipped in a bit, but we were genuinely poor, extremely poor. Then a truck arrived. The man who was meant to hang himself was standing on the truck. His hands were securely tied. It slowly pulled up, revealing a noose hanging ominously from the second-floor balcony. I leaped onto the car, secured the noose tightly around him, and then jumped off. Meanwhile, the driver continued to drive the car, causing the noose to tighten even further.
These Jews worked for
The Third Reich? They were working. To avoid being hanged, he had to ensure everyone else was hanged.
Tell me, were there ideological discussions in your division or courses by the Germans? Did they turn you against Jews? Were you indoctrinated? What was the idea? What were you fighting for? How did it work?
No, no, no. The Ukrainians gave us lectures, and there was nothing in them directed against the Jews. There was no mention of Jews whatsoever, neither positive nor negative.
I mean, there weren't anti-Semites gathered in the division specifically to...
Definitely. That was much more common.
How did Ukrainians in general, the local population, the people of Lviv, feel about the fact that the Germans were enacting laws like that against the Jews? Hostile.
We said, she can work. There's truly no reason to glorify individuals who poisoned and caused the deaths of many people. The majority of Ukrainians opposed it.
We have observed a trend where numerous individuals visit our channel for a particular episode and subsequently begin exploring more of our content. To ensure that you don't miss out on any of our videos, kindly verify if you might have forgotten to subscribe. Thank you. Russian propaganda has consistently attempted to label all members of the division as Nazis. Furthermore, there's the issue concerning the Jewish community. Were there any accusations from them? I've encountered various perspectives. One perspective argues they aren't war criminals, meaning they didn't commit any wartime offenses. Conversely, another viewpoint insists, being in the SS means you're automatically Nazis, you endorse that ideology.
There were a total of 42 SS divisions. Among these, about 20 were volunteer divisions composed of foreigners. Why are the remaining divisions still not mentioned today? It's like a thorn in the side, particularly our Ukrainian 14th Division, the Alisun. All the attacks against them. Why does this happen? I can't comprehend it. Ever since their demobilization in 1948, they continue to live in fear and be terrorized. Why exactly was the OBZU established in England? It wasn't only for the division members. It was because Britain was where they faced the most intense pressure. Of course, all of this was orchestrated under the direction of Moscow, specifically the KGB. There is a center dedicated to tracking down Nazi war criminals, the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Their main office is located in Austria. Wiesenthal himself has already passed away. They were the ones who really gave the division members the hardest time and pursued them the most relentlessly. Let's frame it like this.
Did they present any evidence? I want to say,
when they left England for Canada in 1951, Canada officially accepted about 2,000 division soldiers. They had been thoroughly vetted in Britain, meticulously and scrupulously, and were vetted again upon arrival, submitting repeat requests to Britain. Essentially, these people just wanted a normal life. The division never participated in punitive operations, were never stationed at concentration camps, and there were no Einsatzgruppen operations against civilians or anything similar. It was entirely a frontline division, nothing but frontline. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, it never engaged in combat with the Allies. It was solely against the Bolsheviks. However, Simon Wiesenthal and his entire team simply couldn't let the matter rest. In the year 1984, in collaboration with the KGB, which had initiated an operation known as Возмездие, they devised significant plans to tarnish the reputation of division members globally and to create division between the Ukrainian and Jewish communities in Canada, the United States, and other places. Numerous newspapers covered this story. The Toronto Star, a prominent Canadian newspaper, published reports about Nazi criminals residing in Canada, among other allegations. They circulated pamphlets asserting that soldiers of the Ukrainian division had blood on their hands. Do you know all your neighbors on your street? Or maybe a Nazi lives in the house next door. The Canadian government, led by Maloney at the time, was forced to establish a government commission to provide an answer, to get to the bottom of it. And that commission was headed by a well-known renowned lawyer, a federal judge on the Supreme Court of Canada, Jules Deschênes. And besides him, there were, I don't know exactly how many members there were, but it was a very large, powerful team, all professional journalists who spent 2 years digging and investigating. They called in the division members for questioning, conducted investigations, and meticulously searched through every archive globally. How many times, even before the Commission started its work, did that Wiesenthal Center assert that they possessed a vast amount of evidence of crimes by the division members? They did not submit even a single piece of evidence, absolutely nothing. The very same Soviet Union that made such a huge fuss about the division members being involved in various activities. Even if the Kremlin has anything, some documents, I seriously doubt it. Because they would have certainly, without any doubt, used that evidence to finish them off completely. This commission worked diligently for almost 2 years. In the year 1987, they submitted an extensive report to the Canadian government, which consisted of 966 pages. The conclusion reached was that no evidence was found of the division members' involvement in any crimes against humanity. Absolutely nothing was discovered. Mere membership in the division does not provide grounds for criminal prosecution, nor is it grounds for extradition, deprivation of civil rights, and so on, including the revocation of Canadian and American citizenship that had been demanded. However, this development is quite fascinating. I mentioned that the Toronto Star is indeed a newspaper. Consequently, they issued an apology and even went as far as to refute all those falsehoods within their own pages. Here is the retraction and apology from the Toronto Star concerning the article by their own correspondent, Saul Littman, who accused the division and its soldiers of committing war crimes. Despite the fact that this Ukrainian division was integrated into the German armed forces, there is no evidence suggesting that it engaged in any atrocities or other criminal acts. Each of its members was individually vetted by the United Nations, British and Canadian authorities after the war, before being admitted to Canada. Star apologizes for any inconvenience that the division's veterans living in Canada may have experienced as a result of the aforementioned article. And the newspaper's editor-in-chief, Borden Spears, acknowledged in a letter to the lawyers that the Toronto Star's own research into the history of the Galician Division had convinced them that linking the division's members to the War Crimes Commission had been a mistake. And they did not stop at that point.
During the Nuremberg Trials, which signified the conclusion of the war, was there any mention of the Galician Division? Since the SS troops faced conviction there, and the Galician Division was indeed a segment of the SS Strel.
We all know that history is often written by the victors. Let's begin with the fact that there were a total of 42 volumes of materials from the Nuremberg Trials. Yes, 42 volumes. How many of us have ever even heard of that? In the Soviet Union, only 7 of these volumes were published, just the parts that were convenient for them and so on. I personally have 5 of these volumes at home in my library. I still can't manage to find 2 of them. Ukrainian issues were not addressed at all, absolutely not. Neither the UAN, nor the UPA, nor the Roland and Nachtigall battalions, nor the Didi Galiciana. There wasn't even the slightest mention of them. Do you understand what I'm saying? You have the freedom to write and draw whatever you want on fences, but remember, it's not always the truth. The structures of the Reich, including the SS, all parties, organizations, and military formations as a whole, were not universally condemned. Only certain specific groups within them, at the core, on the inside, there wasn't even a mention of the division itself. So, what more is there to discuss here? Everything is distorted. After the war, just think about how many years entire institutions in the Soviet Union worked to falsify, to distort, to smear all of this with filth, you understand, to prevent them from living in peace.
Given the annexation of Galicia by the USSR, the terror and the killings, the locals understood that they could not allow the liberator to return here. Just think about what the Soviet authorities did here. that people in Ukraine were willing to side with the Third Reich.
These are the memoirs of Bogdan Senev, a division soldier. I knew him personally, we were neighbors. In 1940, he was 15 years old, a high school student, already a student in the Soviet Union. His older brother, Yaroslav, studied at the Polytechnic. They were from a village, but lived in an apartment in Lviv. At 4 a.m., the NKVD arrived at their place, ransacked the apartment, and took all the photo albums and books they found. They took both of them to a car, but right by the car they actually let Bogdan go. He was just a kid, only 15 years old. However, they took his brother Yaroslav away, and Bogdan never saw him again. Later, when the Germans arrived, he heard rumors from people who had been in those prisons. He knew his brother was being held in Samartiniv. So when the Germans arrived, he got on his bike and rode to Lviv along with thousands of other people, folks from all the villages were gathering at those prisons, hoping to find their loved ones. Bogdan Senev also arrived at the Zamartinivka prison. It was summer there and the heat was unbearable. The corpses were already decomposing and the stench was so terrible that the Germans simply sealed off the prison the very next day. It wasn't reopened until the winter of '42 when it was freezing to prevent an epidemic from breaking out. He even begged the German for a gas mask and went through those cells. I initially thought he might have been exaggerating somewhat, to say the least, when he described the horrific scene of the crucified priest on the wall of one of the cells. His stomach gruesomely slit open. Beside him there was a pregnant woman, brutally murdered, beaten severely, with her belly cut open and her unborn child taken out. Honestly, I believed he was exaggerating. However, these were his genuine memories. In fact, they were even published in the newspaper Memorial back in the year 1991. But it kept bothering me. After I analyzed his memoirs, I began to investigate, and I discovered it. This is a true story. There was a priest called the Redemptorists in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Zenon Wrublewski. Can you imagine? It's beyond understanding. And Bogdan Senev never found his brother among the beaten victims. They were among the first to enter, yes, and they walked around. Some cells couldn't be opened because so many bodies were piled up, so they released gas. And when people tried to open the doors, they all died, making it impossible to open them from this side. There was as much as 10 centimeters of blood covering the corridors of the Lonsky detention center. It was flowing from all that. They entered one of the cells. What did they witness? A large table. A man severely disfigured lay there. He was naked. Well, he was dead. A look of horror was frozen on his face, his features horribly distorted. Yet he was covered by a peculiar glass dome. All over his body were some very strange holes, wounds. Within a moment, rats began emerging from those holes in his body. That was basically how they tortured him. They would cover a person with a bare sheet and then release hungry rats onto them. You can imagine the horror. In another cell, they discovered individuals who were being skinned alive. They would make an incision with a scalpel and wrap the skin around a pencil-like object, some kind of stick, gradually peeling it off in strips. Well, that was indeed the motivation for the division soldiers. The same Bogdan Senev, his mother told him that his father was a priest. They were very peaceful people, you understand. His mother and father gave him their blessing. His mother said, "Go, son, and avenge your brother's death." His name was Bogdan Stasiv. The people of Halich had three paths before them. He pointed out the three paths: either enlist in the division or join the UP, or sit on the couch and wait for the Bolsheviks to come and take him to prison or to the NKVD. And everyone understood that then he definitely wouldn't save his own skin, because he'd either be killed at the front or shot in the NKVD basements. There were the UPA and Galicia. We were presented with a decision to make. Yes, indeed, I could have joined the UPA, but at that time the UPA wasn't very widespread. That's one aspect. Secondly, Ukrainian insurgents were gathering in the forests. They were primarily peasants. He lived in a village with a nearby forest. The guy would even visit his mom's place at night for some pies and might sleep in the barn. He also had a hideout in the garden or somewhere similar. He was closely connected to both the forest and that surrounding environment. But as for me, being a student who had never experienced living in the countryside, where would I go just going to the forest and living in a dugout, that really didn't seem suitable for me at that time. Thirdly, that period was actually just starting and it didn't have the authority or recognition it holds today. You're a young man and they instruct you to go into the woods and then what? Hide out there in the rain, in snow and so forth. In short, they pondered over extensively and eventually the majority chose to join the division to accomplish that goal. They all aspire to have their own Ukrainian state. To establish a Ukrainian state which can solely be attained through struggle, a Ukrainian army was necessary. Being aware that a division was being organized, 99% of these recruits believed they would undergo military training, be instructed in professional military skills, learn how to handle weapons and more. They were convinced that joining the division was the path to achieving their dreams of a Ukrainian state. And the time will eventually come. Furthermore, the majority of them believed that the Allies would eventually turn their weapons against the Soviet Union after Germany's fall. Moreover, when Europe is redrawn and restructured, Ukraine will finally take its rightful place in the world stage.
Today, we are here to pay tribute to and honor the brave soldiers who served in the glorious Galicia Division.
Unlike UPA, Galician Division fighters do not hold combatant status at the state level, combat operations, or as fighters for Ukraine's freedom.
Today, there are numerous young men with golden lions on their sleeves, standing strong to defend our land. This signifies their remembrance of the founding principles of the Galician Division. At present, many of these young men have risen to the ranks of commanders, leading various units, brigades, platoons, and companies. Throughout our history, we have consistently stood with dignity for the glory and honor of our great and unconquered nation. We continue to carry forward the glory of the Galician Division. This serves as a benchmark for us. These are our genuine heroes. And today, I pay my respects before the emblem of the SS Galicia Division.
Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. So, what were the relations between the UPA fighters and the division soldiers prior to the battle?
Close to Brody. During that period, the main issue was that we, in a manner of speaking, provided them with ammunition. They were experiencing difficulties with their ammunition supply. And as they say, we could save anywhere from 50 to 100 rounds of ammunition on just one sortie. This was the main thing that really kept us connected to the OPA, the constant supply of ammunition that we were providing them with.
At that time, were you familiar with those names? Did you discuss figures like Bandera and Shukhevych among yourselves? Did everyone recognize them? Or have they only become widely known now?
I had known about Bandera and Shukhevych for quite a long time. I joined the OPA and later went to the division. These were such prominent and well-known figures that even individuals like these Benkarts were aware of them.
What were people generally saying about them back then?
Well, you know how it is. Ukrainians tend to be like that. They're often split into two camps. Some people say that one person is following the right policy, while the other half argues that shouldn't have been done, we should have done it this way. For some reason, we're always divided like this.
The SS ideology opposed Christianity. For Ukrainians, especially Galician spiritual care was key in forming the division. Thus, SS leader Heinrich Himmler made an exception for Galicia. This unit was the first in. Within the SS forces, military chaplains were permitted as an institution. Approximately 15 priests were assigned to the unit. Most of them represented the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. I wonder how one of the most influential Ukrainians of that time, Metropolitan Andrei, viewed this.
Shukhevych, the Germans were anti-religious, but they weren't atheists. They had their own beliefs and so on. There were Catholics and various other Christians, but the higher-ups, they didn't really put up much resistance. They simply didn't enforce that policy within their own troops. But here they took into account the fact that these were, after all, Galicians, that this was the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that the people were very devout. And so they made that concession. The Ukrainian Central Committee, for its part, made many demands of them.
It seems releasing Bandera was among the demands.
I'm not sure if Bandera was present, I truly don't know, but there was a demand for the release of political prisoners and other similar requests. They did in fact release 150 men. There was also a call to support the families of the division soldiers. Financial aid was provided to them, and from what I can gather, that's the extent of what occurred. However, many demands were not fulfilled. In my opinion, the most crucial demand, this was among the primary ones, was that they engage in combat solely against the Bolsheviks, exclusively on the Eastern Front. And indeed, the Germans truly kept their promise. Not one soldier from those divisions fired even a single shot at the Allies, whether they were Americans or the British. That's a certainty. The same was true for the chaplains. Given their deep devotion, our people are very devout. They granted such permission, but this wasn't an isolated incident. Our division was the 14th. It was identified by the number 14, while the 13th was the Croatian Hajar division. They also had their own chaplains. In fact, they had mullahs since there were Muslims among them. So the Germans went along with this for these two divisions. And the most interesting thing is that Shukhevych, speaking of Shukhevych, I know that's probably what you wanted to ask.
So, I wanted to ask, Andriy Shukhevych, one of the most influential Ukrainians, they say he was extremely influential and wealthy at the time. How did he feel about the division? Positively? But
no documents have been found up to this day. Debates and disputes still continue. Did he give his blessing or did he not? The only thing that remains are the memoirs of Vladimir Kubiovich himself. As soon as the formation started, he immediately went to meet with Shukhevych. Later in his memoirs, he recalled that Shukhevych spoke these famous words to him, that there is almost no price too high to pay for the creation of a Ukrainian army.
However, he personally never made any public appearances anywhere.
In fact, no one has proven or denied its authenticity. He viewed it sympathetically. Understanding the army's needs, he knew a dark cloud loomed, that we had to defend ourselves and that the future state required an army. Well-known photos show many senior officers, colonels and lieutenants from the former Ukrainian Galician army of the ONR volunteered for the division. There is a famous photograph of them standing in the courtyard of St. George's Church, patiently waiting for Shukhevych blessing. However, there is no documented evidence that he ever spoke openly about it.
However, the church itself was supportive of the effort. It even provided its own members. To put it differently, without him, I believe they wouldn't have been able to accomplish it.
He called on the church even after the campaign started, when teams traveled through villages and towns. Leading these teams were colonels and officers of the Ukrainian People's Republic. It wasn't an order, but a call for local priests to support, not campaign. Christ of Shukhevych, having risen and recognizing the significant importance of the chaplaincy, appointed Father Mitrat, who was not only a professor but also headed the theological seminary in Lviv, Father Vasil Laba. Incidentally, he also served as the chief chaplain of the siege camps. He appointed him as the chief chaplain of the division. After completing their training, they received officer ranks. True, they did not wear the Totenkopf insignia on their headgear. Among them were even some individuals who, well, their fates differed. Captured ones were chaplains attached to regiments too. I'm talking about those caught in the crossfire, such as Father Mikhailo Levenes. He was truly a heroic individual. Many people, including soldiers from the division, praised him highly. He successfully led a group of 100 men out of the encirclement with our Christ and MP40, along with an automatic rifle. He led them. He held the rank of Horunji, which is equivalent to an Untersturmführer, and led out more than 100 men. Among them were people like Josip Kladokny, a priest who was captured while seriously wounded. Some couldn't cope. Their nerves gave out. There were all kinds of individuals. Each person's fate was different.
That's the uniform of the division's soldiers. By the way, the Germans prohibited them from wearing chevrons, SS That's how recruitment used to be in those days.
MG-40A, the 1942 model, the so-called Hitler's saw, rate of fire, 1,400 rounds per minute.
Did the division soldiers have one like this? Absolutely.
All of them? Well, the cream of the crop of machine guns of all time. Half of these are from the Brody cauldron. Here's a Panzerfaust dug up from the Brody cauldron. Did you dig this up near Brody 16 or 17 years ago? Not me. I don't dig.
I'm purchasing them.
Wait, what are people doing by Brody?
Found like that. They find it all.
There are still some items remaining.
However, these boxes and all this stuff, it's somewhat like Terabesi. It's entirely original.
The pivotal moment was the Battle of Brody. Surrounded, you were sent to halt the advancing Red Army. Rumor had it the Germans were retreating, and the Galician Division fought its first major battle at Brody. Did you resent the Germans for thrusting you into such a fierce fight?
They held no grudge against the Germans for sending them into battle, because that was the nature of military service. What upset them was that they saw us heading to the front, while the Germans themselves were fleeing from it. The Germans? Yes, even here. Somewhere near the forest where I was wandering, I was riding in a car, and there I was just resting, Lisner, resting. A path, you know. And he was driving a tank, and he was signaling me to get off the road. He was fleeing like that. There were so many of them. I noticed trucks filled with who knows what, possibly ammunition, explosives, or something else entirely, escaping while we were moving towards the front lines. And I eventually found myself exactly where the chapel stands today. If you head down there, you'll see that there was some sort of dugout in that place. There were 7 of us, and we managed to hold out for an entire day. After that, we stayed put because we had completely run out of ammunition. Then at some point a captain drove up to us.
The Soviet, the Red Army, right?
We have this one guy who can't sit or walk because he's injured somewhere in his back. He's just sitting there like that, unable to move. Another soldier knelt down beside him, and the wounded man leaned on his knee for support. Then a guy in a car drove past us, stopped, and got out. The commander asks, "What are you still doing here?" There were those K-13 guys. They had just been arrested, but then, from a distance, they somehow gave themselves away. The commander says, "What are you staring at this filth for? Get out of here." And he pulls out a pistol from his holster. At that moment, I thought, that's it. My veins were trembling with fear. But right at that very moment, a group of Moscow soldiers happened to be driving in from Zolochiv. They came to a stop. The senior lieutenant was at the forefront. He glanced over and said, "Comrade Captain, they are unarmed. You cannot shoot them." I'm not sure what the captain said as he had his back to me. Yet, I sensed something was happening. He shouted that way, and the senior lieutenant, with such a, authoritative tone, "Comrade Captain, they're unarmed, you can't just shoot them like that." And those 20, his soldiers, whether they were following orders, or maybe there was an order, I'm not sure. First, the automatic weapons fired once. Rat-a-tat-tat. The captain looked over and said, "I'll take care of you." He got into the car and drove away. I'm not sure if he faced any trouble later, because he sent a soldier who took us to Shlak-Tintsy. A staging area was there. They were loading us onto a truck, and I spoke to that soldier. He was sitting at the back of the truck, and we were sitting right up in the front. He pulls out a knife. You guys know what a folding knife is, right? The kind we had seen before. He approaches me, and my blood went cold, as they say. I thought, if they didn't shoot me back there, they'll stab me here. That thought raced through my mind in a split second. It would have been better to die from a bullet. At least it would have been faster. But he came over, and for all of us who had divisional insignia, he cut them right off. Then he leaned in close to me and said, "Don't you dare admit that you were a machine gunner." I said I wasn't a machine gunner. They told all of us, "You were a machine gunner. Don't admit it, or they'll shoot you." So they reported me, and the very next day they handed each of us a beetroot, one of those yellow ones, perhaps a sugar beet or something similar. Then they loaded us onto train cars and transported us to Uglavral.
But they say the Red Army had the advantage. They were bombing from planes, and there was nothing you could do about it.
That's why I agree. We were near Brody. We barely caught sight of any German aircraft. However, they relentlessly bombarded Moscow without mercy.
Let's begin with the fact that when the Bolshevik offensive started, our troops were in the second line. The Germans broke through that defense with two wedges, one in the north near Radehiv and another in the southeast near Zolochiv. They aimed to trap them at Krasnobursk, which indeed happened, but that was later. Those attacks were preceded by massive artillery barrages. Planes bombed their positions and so on, artillery, and only then did they advance with troops, tanks, infantry, and so forth. The Germans, who were already exhausted from the intense fighting as the Wehrmacht was maintaining that initial line, were utterly terrified. They abandoned their trenches in a panic and fled, leaping over our division soldiers stationed just behind them on the second line. They were signaling frantically to them, saying, "Run away quickly, because you can see that ominous dark cloud approaching. It will spell disaster for all of you." What I'm trying to convey is this. This was essentially the first significant battle for the Galician Division, even though they had already gained some combat experience. A few months earlier, 1,500 soldiers from the division had been dispatched on a mission to the Kolchina and Lublin regions of Poland. Their task was to combat the Red Partisans. Once the attack commenced, they maintained their defensive positions for 2 weeks, nearly 3 weeks, and it became evident that they were in retreat. Not a single soldier from the division surrendered willingly. They either suffered severe injuries or were utterly exhausted, just like our Zenon Wrublewski. Consequently, during those 2 weeks, the Germans pulled back their units from Lviv. Consider Ternopil, for instance. Before that, the battles for Ternopil happened in the spring of 1944, prior to the Battle of Brody. Hitler had declared Ternopil a fortress city, one that had to be defended to the death, to the very end, using the last bullet. As a consequence, Ternopil was utterly destroyed. Absolutely nothing was left of the city. Only ruins remained, just ruins. And Lviv could have faced the same fate. Actually, by then, the Germans had already moved their units further away. And there were still some people left there, you know. And when they finally approached Lviv on the 20th of July, there were already, you know, not full-scale battles, but just skirmishes. Otherwise, we wouldn't have our opera house, our university, or any of our other historic buildings. That's one side of the story. The other side is that, after all, tens of thousands of people, thanks to these young men, their valor and their courage, which held back the onslaught, managed to flee westward. And in this manner, numerous individuals, including Zenon Wrublewski's parents, were rescued from that terror, sparing them from annihilation. My dad and mom, since they had 2 sons in the division, would not have been spared, that's for sure, 100%.
How did the Soviet army typically treat the soldiers of the division? I've heard there were certain decrees from Stalin concerning them. It's quite a unique story.
Stalin had a deep hatred for them, a personal vendetta. They were being eliminated, the wounded were finished off, and so on. Not all division soldiers knew, but those aware, when capture was inevitable, would remove their SS uniforms. They had camouflage uniforms, after all. They'd get them from the dead or elsewhere and wear Wehrmacht uniforms. That's how the policy worked. Wehrmacht soldiers, Germans, were taken prisoner. They just raised their hands and that was it. And they truly tormented the division soldiers. A wounded man is lying there, someone walks up and gouges out his eyes with a bayonet. He didn't just shoot him, he did all sorts of things like that, a lot of it. Many were shot. There was a division soldier named Vasil Boykiv, a very interesting man. He was the one who practically brought me into the Brotherhood. He was seriously wounded in the spine. He showed me his spine. You could have stuck a fist right into that hole. And when he came to, covered in blood, he heard voices talking above him. He opened his eyes slowly and asked, with his lips parched. He saw two Red Army soldiers standing there, and one said to the other, "Petro, look, the fascist's still alive." And he spoke, "Guys, I'm one of you, a Ukrainian. Look, he's even talking, let's shoot him." They were Ukrainians, actually, mobilized from Greater Ukraine. And once more he says, I said goodbye to life, closed my eyes completely, and then heard, "Let him go." And so he was telling me, he says, I opened my eyes and saw there was an older man standing there. How much older? He was 17 and the man was 40. He says, for some reason, I thought he was Siberian. His hair was braided. Just like that, he spared his life. He stopped them from shooting him. You are heroes now. Be heroes in battle.
I read the book Mr. Ihor wrote about you, detailing how you were captured and exiled far away in Russia. It struck me that you were essentially one of the biggest threats to the Soviet Union. Ukrainians who fought for the Third Reich in the SS eventually lived normal lives there, working, earning a salary, and even managed to escape later. I was quite struck by the fact that some people, members of the divisions, chose to stay and live there instead of returning to Ukraine.
I had a colleague I met after escaping. We met here in Lviv. He had also fled from there. We began talking and he told me, my mom went to the train station to buy a ticket. I asked, where to? He replied, back home. He expressed, what kind of life is this? I'm either on the front lines or stuck in the middle of nowhere. If not there, then I'm in a barn. He continued, I'm constantly in hiding, always hiding. That's no life. And I'm unsure if he returned or not. That's truly living, still living, even while in hiding. Very much so.
And what was really difficult was that you returned here, but your relatives and friends back there weren't very willing to welcome you, because it was quite an issue, right? Here? Yes, right here.
Let me put it this way. Well, I can't say with absolute certainty, but I noticed that a significant number of my acquaintances weren't exactly, as they say, showing sympathy toward us. I understand their perspective. If they had found me in his house, they would have arrested him as well. You know what I mean? So I comprehend why they weren't overly eager to invite us into their homes.
Have you ever regretted joining the division? No.
I even got into a fight a couple of times while at the camp. When I was sentenced the second time, I ended up fighting twice. One of those fights was with one of our own, a Ukrainian. Oh, you experienced that as well. You had a father, you worked hard. You could, as they say, attend high school and learn about business. I'm saying, well, someone like you. But even then, people were still being buried, and it was profitable. So eventually one thing led to another, and I punched him. And that was it.
It's interesting that you received a longer sentence for your time as a UPA liaison than for your time in the Galician Division. In other words, the sentence there was much longer than the first time.
The first time, you see, I didn't have one. I didn't have a sentence at all. I was imprisoned, but there was no official document stating that I had been sentenced to life. However, the second time, things were different. I had a complete, full-fledged sentence.
Nowadays, very often, when Ukrainian soldiers are taken prisoner, the Russians subject them to terrible abuse there, and they torture a lot of people to death. After you were taken prisoner following your division's capture, were the methods just as brutal, or was it still?
You know, perhaps there were some in other places. I can't be certain. But among the individuals I was with during that time, in Russia, there was an absolute shortage of labor. They would bring you in during the evening, but by that time you had already been working. This is the reason why they didn't overwork us. You would continue working through the night, receiving 600 grams, and in the morning you'd receive another 600 grams. At that time there was porridge available, however, In the evening, there was nothing more than just a scoop. The work was primarily logging and mining.
It's hard work all day.
Right. Can you imagine? It's 40 degrees outside, yet I'm feeling cold. And there's this massive tree lying there. The entire time, even when I began cutting that tree, I was just standing there shivering. Did you cover it up? Yeah, I did. Otherwise, I would get frostbite. Once we gathered a bit of strength, there were many of us. I'd say the majority. We began establishing our own rules. In captivity, yes, for instance. I can't recall which mine it was, but there was some sort of national holiday. Well, maybe a victory or something, I can't quite remember. They grant the free people a holiday, yet we, the prisoners, are required to work. So we descended into the mine and decided to sit down and sing. Shortly after, the mine's deputy foreman appeared, and we expressed our dissatisfaction to him. He left, only to return with the camp commander. We voiced our discontent to the commander as well, asking him, "What are you going to do about it?" And that's the story of how we ended up not working that day.
Weren't you afraid that they might harm you, possibly beat or shoot you, or something else?
You see, once you get swept up in all the excitement, you really don't stop to think about those things.
You were imprisoned in Vorkuta. These areas were right next to the military prisoners. That is the Galician Division, the UPA, and Ukrainian political nationalists. And right next to them were the criminals. So, all these concepts, these laws. How did these two worlds coexist?
That was the moment when we seized full control ourselves. Before then, those criminals had been tormenting us. They had taken our uncle right from the field. They led him away, and he was completely unaware of his location or destination. They exploited that situation. However, once we organized ourselves, we demonstrated who was truly in charge. They believed they were meant to oversee everything without lifting a finger. But we said, "Oh, really?" And we asserted our authority. We ensured they worked just like Kay.
So you just fought them? We did.
No, we didn't kill them. I don't want to say that. We just beat them up. The inmates, yes. The criminals, yes.
And what happened after that? They started working too, right? That's how it was.
It was just a day or two. Certainly not any longer than that.
There was this incident after being captured by the NKVD following your time with the UPA. You were very lucky because they had abolished the death penalty, execution by firing squad. If it had been just a few months earlier or later, you would have been shot. Tell us about that moment when you all ended up together in the semi-trailer, the former division soldiers. You got in, the truck was moving, and they were taking you straight to the prisons. So you get in there, and how were you greeted?
The criminals. Well, the criminals would immediately gather together in a group, almost as if they were following a command, you know. It was all to create the impression that there were many of them. Well, what other options did we have? How were we supposed to live? Like men or like animals? They would say it immediately, and then we would adjust our mindset accordingly. In most cases, we eventually came out ahead. Because ultimately, there were far more of us.
So you fought just for the right to speak your mind?
They beat us, broke us, and knocked us down.
From their side, it seemed humane. In human terms, you worked, and they gave orders.
They're in charge. It's okay, though. They don't harm us.
So you're doing their tasks, while they just sit back and enjoy themselves.
And they're pushing us around, taking control. There were 40 of us, and only 20 of them. So why should they be the ones in charge, dictating our actions? Sometimes, even before they had completely let us into the cell, a fight would have already erupted, tensions boiling over into chaos.
A fight as we're being admitted? Yes.
The door leading to the hallway remains open. Security personnel are still positioned behind the door, and people have already started fighting in this area.
How did the security guards react? Did they side with the criminals, or did they?
The Ukrainians, they're very clever. They've been observing to see who gets the upper hand.
In March of 1945, when the Third Reich was nearing its downfall, Hitler was first informed about the SS Galicia Division. To quote him, "Now I find myself unable to form new units within Germany because of a shortage of weapons. Therefore, it is foolish to provide arms to a Ukrainian division that isn't fully dependable. I would prefer to withdraw their weapons and establish a new German division instead. I do not intend to suggest that nothing can be accomplished with foreign troops, but it requires time." If they had been raised and trained for 6 to 10 years in their homeland, as was customary under the old monarchy, they would have obviously become good soldiers. However, if they are recruited when their homeland is far away, what exactly are they supposed to fight for? Such formations are a luxury we simply cannot afford. Hitler gave the directive to disarm the Ukrainians and transfer these soldiers to a parachute brigade. The division command was shocked, as they were required to hand over all their weapons to Nuremberg. At that moment, 20,000 division soldiers might have been unarmed.
First of all, let's put it this way. Those survivors who made it out of Pit Brody, there were about 1,500 of them, came to Transcarpathia, and they were then transported to that same Neuhammer, while another 1,500 made their way to Neuhammer via various detours. Some of them, about 3,000, joined the UPA and so on. By the way, there were only about 12,000 of them at the gates, not a full complement. And when they came back to that Neuhammer, in September, the creation of a new second division started. This was due to the fact that only a few of them remained. At that point, those who had been drafted joined in. Additionally, those who had been forced laborers in Germany also became part of it. They were captured Red Army soldiers, including Ukrainians. The group was quite diverse. Some had Russian last names, and there were even individuals who had been employees of the district party committees. They were all different, but naturally their numbers were not large. Besides, this contingent was no longer the same, it had transformed. These were not the original volunteers who had initially set out and successfully passed the rigorous selection process. Only 1 out of 10 managed to make it through. Initially, they had been chosen, according to Yaroslav Gonka's memoirs, because at that time we were driven by two powerful forces, faith in God and love for Ukraine. They were patriots with a capital P. But as for these others, well, they were decent guys, but they were different, you see. And in fact, when the war came to an end in Austria and Hitler's order was issued, it was Vector who once again came to the rescue. That's where Vector came in. They say we were prepared and unwilling to surrender our weapons. We were even prepared to make a daring return from Austria, crossing the Carpathians to join the UPA. However, we were waiting for some kind of directive from the organization, specifically from the UN. We had emissaries from the UN, along with liaisons and officers, but unfortunately, no such directive ever arrived.
Why did Hitler want to disarm the Galician Division? Well,
it seems that he didn't have trust in them, at least that's my belief, and they were running out of weapons, or perhaps it was merely his ambition overtaking his judgment. He might have thought, this has been happening for 2 years, and you're only telling me now. It's difficult to determine. It was right at the conclusion of the war, what was on his mind before he took his own life. By the way, Division Commander Fritz Frey, at a later time, ended up shooting himself while he was in Austria.
Throughout the years of World War II, Ukrainians found themselves on various sides of the barricades, confronting the challenges, affairs, and issues of other nations and different regimes. That's why, no matter how tough it is now. That said, we must appreciate that we are fighting for our own interests, not someone else's. At the conclusion of the war, the majority of the division's soldiers chose to surrender to the British and Americans. They were guided by a principle, determined not to end up in the USSR. Zenon Wrublewski endured 9 years in labor camps. Subsequently, he was compelled to reside in Vorkuta until the 1960s. His future wife joined him there, and together they had 2 children. The division's members established their own brotherhood, and later supporters created a division reserve. Many of these members joined the Ukrainian Defense Forces, proudly wearing the golden lion emblem on their sleeves. They continue to fight against their age-old enemy.